I used to work as a pizza delivery driver during my college days, and while most of my experiences were mundane, there was one particular night that I'll never forget. It was a true paranormal horror story that still sends shivers down my spine. It was a chilly October evening, and the moon hung low in the dark sky as I clocked in for my shift at Tony's Pizzeria. I had a stack of pizza boxes ready to go, and my trusty old car was fueled up and ready to roll. Little did I know, this night would turn out to be the most terrifying experience of my life. I received an order for a large pepperoni pizza, extra cheese, and a side of garlic knots. The delivery address was out in the countryside, a place I hadn't been to before. I plugged the address into my GPS, and it guided me through winding roads surrounded by dense woods. The atmosphere felt eerie, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding as I approached the destination. The GPS directed me to a desolate-looking house that appeared abandoned. The windows were covered in thick curtains, and the yard was overgrown with weeds. A flickering porch light barely illuminated the front door, which was slightly ajar. I hesitated for a moment but decided to knock. A shiver ran down my spine as I waited in the eerie silence. Suddenly, the door creaked open slowly, revealing nothing but darkness inside. I called out, "Pizza delivery." No response. Just an unsettling silence. I cautiously stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The air inside the house was ice cold, and a putrid smell hung in the air. I made my way through the dimly lit hallway, guided only by the faint glow of my phone's flashlight. As I ventured deeper into the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The walls were adorned with faded, peeling wallpaper and old family photos, but something about them felt off, as if the people in the pictures were staring right through me. It was unnerving, to say the least. Finally, I reached what seemed to be the living room. The room was in complete disarray, with furniture overturned and shattered glass everywhere. My heart sank as I realized that something terrible had happened here. I called out again, "Hello? Pizza delivery." Still, there was no response. I continued my search, making my way towards the kitchen. The smell grew stronger, and I feared what I might find. The kitchen was a horror show. Dirty dishes were piled high in the sink, and the floor was sticky with some unidentifiable substance. And then, I saw it, the pizza box I had delivered earlier, untouched on the table. My mind raced with fear as I tried to make sense of the situation. Where was the customer? What had happened in this house? My gut told me to leave immediately, but I couldn't just abandon the pizza and the garlic knots, so I picked them up and headed back towards the front door. Just as I was about to make my escape, I heard a whisper coming from the darkness. It was a soft, eerie voice, almost a whisper, saying, "Stay with us." I froze in my tracks, my heart pounding as I scanned the shadows for the source of the voice. That's when I saw them, figures moving in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with an otherworldly light. They were pale and gaunt, their faces twisted in agony. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. I was paralyzed with fear. The figures began to advance toward me, their whispers growing louder and more menacing. "Stay with us," they chanted in unison, their voices sending shivers down my spine. Panic surged through my veins as I stumbled backward, dropping the pizza and garlic knots in my haste to escape. I raced out of the house and slammed the door shut behind me, gasping for breath. I jumped into my car and sped away from that accursed place as fast as I could. As I looked back in my rearview mirror, I saw the figures standing on the porch, their eyes fixed on me until I was out of sight. I never returned to that pizza delivery job after that night. The memory of those pale, haunting figures and their chilling whispers still haunts my nightmares. I don't know what I stumbled upon in that abandoned house, but I'm certain it was something not of this world. And to this day, I can't help but wonder what would have happened if I had stayed with them. I still remember that night like it was yesterday, even though it happened over a decade ago. It was a cold and rainy evening, and I was working the late shift at Sal's Pizzeria, delivering pizzas to the people of our small town. Little did I know that this would be a night I would never forget. I had just finished delivering an order to a house on Elm Street, and I was hoping for a quiet night from then on. But as soon as I checked my phone, I saw another order had come in. It was for a flat on the outskirts of town, in a building that was known for its eerie atmosphere. The address sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't afford to turn down any deliveries, so I reluctantly accepted it. The rain had intensified as I drove to the flat, and I could barely see through the windshield. The flat was located on the top floor of the building, and as I climbed the creaky stairs, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The place had a reputation for being haunted, and I had heard all sorts of stories from the locals about strange occurrences in the building. When I reached the door of the flat, I hesitated for a moment before knocking. The door swung open slowly, revealing a dimly lit hallway inside. I called out, "Pizza delivery," but there was no response. The only sound was the soft patter of rain against the windows. I cautiously stepped inside, my heart pounding in my chest. The hallway was narrow and filled with a musty smell that made my stomach churn. I followed the dim light into what appeared to be a living room. The furniture was covered in dusty sheets, and the whole place had an abandoned feel to it. I called out again, "Hello? Anyone home?" Still, there was no answer. I knew I had to leave the pizza somewhere and get out of there as quickly as possible. I placed the box on a dusty coffee table and turned to leave. But just as I was about to head back to the door, I heard a soft whisper coming from the kitchen. It was so faint that I couldn't make out any words, but it sent shivers down my spine. I couldn't ignore it, so I reluctantly walked toward the kitchen. The kitchen was even darker than the living room, and the smell of something rotten hung in the air. I turned on the light, and what I saw made my blood run cold. There, in the middle of the kitchen floor, was a circle of candles, their flames flickering eerily. In the center of the circle was a crude drawing that looked like some sort of symbol, and it was surrounded by strange markings and symbols that I couldn't decipher. I stumbled back in horror, realizing that I had stumbled upon some sort of ritual. The whispering grew louder, and it seemed to be coming from the drawing on the floor. My heart was racing, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned to leave, but as I did, the lights in the kitchen flickered and went out. I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but it refused to turn on. Panic set in as I stood there in the pitch-black kitchen, with only the faint glow of the candles illuminating the room. That's when I heard it, the sound of footsteps coming toward me. They were slow and deliberate, like someone or something was approaching. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but the footsteps were getting closer, and I could feel a presence in the room with me. I stumbled backward, trying to find my way out of the kitchen, but my foot caught on something, and I fell to the floor. As I scrambled to my feet, I felt a cold, bony hand grip my ankle. I screamed and kicked free, scrambling to my feet and blindly searching for the door. Finally, I found the doorknob and burst out into the hallway, gasping for breath. I slammed the door behind me and ran down the stairs, never looking back. As I got into my car and sped away from that accursed building, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had encountered something truly paranormal. I quit my job at Sal's Pizzeria the next day, and I never went back to that flat on the outskirts of town. To this day, I can't explain what I experienced that night, and I don't want to. Some things are better left unexplained, and that night is a chapter of my life that I'm more than happy to leave behind. As a pizza delivery driver, I'd seen my fair share of strange and unsettling things during my late-night shifts. But nothing could have prepared me for the spine-chilling experience I had one fateful evening on a desolate highway. It was a moonless night when the order came in. The address was a motel located on the outskirts of town, right off a desolate stretch of highway. The name Motel Diablo was enough to send shivers down my spine, but I needed the tips, and this was the only order I had for the hour. The clock showed 11:45 p.m. as I pulled into the motel's eerie parking lot. The flickering neon sign buzzed ominously, casting eerie shadows on the cracked asphalt. The motel itself seemed to loom over me, a relic from a bygone era. I found room 13 and hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. An unsettling silence hung in the air. After what felt like an eternity, the door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit room. A single, flickering bulb barely illuminated the interior. Standing in the doorway was a man, his face obscured by a hood and shadows. The room smelled musty, like it hadn't been aired out in years. "Delivery for room 13, I stammered, holding out the pizza box. The hooded figure didn't say a word. Instead, he extended a bony hand and took the pizza, handing me a crumpled bill. I couldn't see his face, but I felt his eyes on me, piercing through the darkness. The bill was generous, but something about the whole situation was deeply unsettling. As I turned to leave, I heard a faint whisper from inside the room. It was a low, guttural voice that sent a chill down my spine. "Come in." I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned back to the hooded figure, but he had already disappeared into the room. Against my better judgment, I took a hesitant step forward and entered the room, pushing the door open slowly. Inside, the room was freezing, despite the warm summer night outside. The flickering bulb in the ceiling barely illuminated the space, revealing tattered wallpaper and a stained carpet. But what caught my attention was the strange assortment of objects scattered around the room. Candles burned on a small makeshift altar, casting eerie shadows on the walls. There were old books with cryptic symbols and strange drawings etched into the floor. It was like something out of a horror movie. I took another step, and the door slammed shut behind me, making me jump. Panic welled up inside me as I tried to open it, but it was as if it had been locked from the outside. I was trapped. The room seemed to come alive with a strange energy. The candles flickered wildly, and I could hear whispers in the air, voices I couldn't understand. I fumbled for my phone, but there was no signal. I was completely cut off from the outside world. Just then, a voice, cold and malevolent, spoke from the darkness. "You should not have come here." I turned to see the hooded figure standing in the corner, his head now pulled back to reveal his pale, gaunt face. His eyes were empty sockets, and his skin hung loosely on his skeletal frame. I couldn't breathe. I was paralyzed with fear. "What do you want?" I managed to croak. The figure approached slowly, his footsteps echoing ominously in the small room. "You delivered the pizza," he hissed. "Now you must stay." I tried to reason with him, to plead for my life, but it was as if I was speaking to a ghost. He raised his bony hand, and suddenly the candles flared to life, illuminating the room with an eerie, red glow. The symbols on the floor seemed to come alive, glowing ominously. I watched in horror as the walls of the room seemed to warp and twist, revealing glimpses of a nightmarish realm beyond. Shadows moved in the corners, and I could hear whispers growing louder, filled with malice and despair. Desperation gripped me as I realized that I was trapped in a place that defied all reason and logic. I had stumbled into something far beyond my comprehension, something paranormal and malevolent. The hooded figure advanced on me, and I could feel an icy grip around my heart. He leaned in close, his empty eyes boring into mine. "You will never leave this place," he whispered. But just as he reached out to touch me, there was a blinding flash of light, and a deafening roar filled the room. The symbols on the floor erupted in flames, and the hooded figure screamed in agony as he was consumed by the inferno. The room seemed to collapse in on itself, and I felt myself being sucked into a vortex of darkness. The next thing I knew, I was lying on the pavement outside the motel, gasping for breath. The motel itself had vanished, leaving only scorched earth in its place. I stumbled to my feet and ran as fast as I could, not looking back. I never spoke of that night to anyone, afraid that they would think I was crazy. But the terror of that encounter still haunts me, and I can't help but wonder if there are other places like Motel Diablo.